Okay, so today we're diving into a world that's just incredibly ambitious in its conception. It's pulled from Kim Stanley Robinson's Green Mars. I
Yeah.
mean, just imagine a place where the sky literally falls down sometimes. People live for centuries. Societies are built inside rock and ice. It's an amazing landscape, constantly changing.
Yeah, and what's really compelling about diving into this, I think, is that it's not just about Mars, the planet. It's really about us, about humanity trying this massive, almost crazy reshaping project. And then, crucially, how that whole new world turns around and reshapes humanity itself. We've got some fantastic source material here, really rich stuff that gives you a great shortcut to understanding this future. It's complex, yeah, but also surprising, sometimes even funny.
Right. So our goal today is to kind of pull out the most important threads from all this.
Yeah.
Want to help understand not just, what happened on this fictional Mars,
Yeah.
but maybe what lessons it holds for us, for our own future, and for you, the curious learners out there trying to piece together the bigger picture. So, yeah, let's get started. Let's begin with the physical transformation itself, this process they call area formation. The scale of it is it's hard to grasp. Our sources talk about these really dramatic early events, like literally the sky fell in a place called Zygote. Can you imagine? Giant plates of ice crashing into lakes, dry ice fizzing away on the beach.
It really throws into sharp relief the sheer audacity of it all, maybe even the hubris, right? Trying to control a whole planet. And it shows how even the best laid plans could just unravel, unintended consequences right from the start. Mars kind of pushing back.
Definitely. And a huge part of that was deliberately engineering the atmosphere.
Yeah.
This scientist, Sachs Russell, he developed the Russell cocktail.
Right, the cocktail. It was basically a powerful mix of greenhouse gases like carbon tetrafluoride, ecosafluorethane, sulfur hexafluoride, methane, nitric oxide. A potent blend. Think of it like a tailored atmospheric blanket designed specifically to trap heat in that specific wavelength, that window between 8 and 12 microns, where Mars just radiates warmth away.
And this wasn't a small thing. It meant automated factories all over the planet, churning out these gases,
Yeah.
a massive industrial effort.
Yeah, huge. And it wasn't only gases either. They needed more warming. So they brought in these, well, monumental pieces of infrastructure. There was the soletta, picture this, a giant lens, essentially, made of slatted mirror sheets, 10,000 kilometers across, parked out at Mars's Lagrange 1 point.
Wow. And the effect was it made the Martian sun look the same size as Earth's sun.
Exactly, changed the whole sky. And later they added an aerial lens too, flying lower down, another powerful instrument. Just these colossal acts of engineering.
Colossal's the word. They were literally moving asteroids, weren't they? Like New Clark and Birch, pushing them into Martian orbit.
They were. And probably the most audacious, or maybe reckless, was the space elevator, extruding this 30,000 kilometer long cable.
7 billion tons of cable.
Right, 7 billion tons from New Clark down towards the volcano Pavonis Mons. But that one didn't exactly go to plan.
No, it had truly catastrophic consequences. When it detached, well, it wrapped around the planet like a whip, caused unbelievable damage to Sheffield.
Yeah, a terrible, terrible event, a real planetary scale disaster, shows the risks involved.
And speaking of risks and consequences,
Yeah.
all that warming had massive side effects they maybe didn't fully anticipate.
Oh, definitely. As the surface warmed up, the permafrost underground started melting, and that led to this thing called frost heaving on an unprecedented scale.
We're talking huge geological changes, right? These giant features called karsts, like massive sinkholes and pingos, these huge ice-cored hills.
Exactly, but like 100 times bigger than anything you see on Earth. It absolutely devastated whole regions, like Isidis Planitia, just reshaped the land in this chaotic way.
It really highlights that tension, doesn't it? Humans trying to impose order, but the planet itself responding in ways that were just wild and unpredictable, challenging that whole idea of control.
Yeah, it does. And they tried to manage it, of course. They started pumping huge amounts of water from underground aquifers to the surface, like in Vestidas Borealis. They even used, get this, underground nuclear explosions sometimes to access the water.
Nuclear explosions, wow. To create oceans?
Pretty much. It led to this massive northern sea wrapping around the planet, large bays filling in places like Cetus Planitia, Burroughs, a settlement, ended up becoming a port city, shows the extreme lengths they went to.
And then there was the burning of Caesivalis. That sounds incredibly dramatic.
It was. Sachs Russell deliberately set fire to these engineered trees, resonated trees, fire seed trees, species that actually needed fire to propagate, designed by Biotique.
So a controlled burn on a planetary scale.
Essentially, yes, but the goal was to rapidly increase the oxygen levels in the atmosphere, a pretty drastic measure.
It's amazing how quickly new life started taking hold amidst all this change. Engineered life.
It is compelling, isn't it? The sources talk about things like cryptoendolithic lichens. They actually live inside
And
rocks.
inside rocks.
Yeah. And snow algae that stained the ice pink. Then you had hardier stuff like Kerguelen cabbage, sandwort, sedges, new kinds of cacti, really gnarled trees adapted to the conditions.
And these weren't just normal plants, were they? Something about being supercharged.
Right. Many were polyploids. They had extra sets of chromosomes, maybe triggered by the UV radiation or the high CO2 levels. It made them incredibly tough, really robust, like nature turning up the volume on their genetics so they could survive, even thrive.
It's just remarkable how fast these new things spread.
Yeah.
But, did the sources get into the ethics of it all? Creating whole new ecologies, this supercharged life? Any worries about unforeseen consequences there?
Oh, absolutely. That's a central conflict. You have figures like Anne Claiborne, who were fiercely opposed to this kind of aggressive ecopoiesis, as she called it. She argued quite powerfully about humanity's right to just redesign a whole planet, questioned whether Mars didn't have its own rights of place. It's a deep philosophical split that runs through the whole narrative.
Okay, so as Mars itself is physically changing, breathing this new life, human society there is changing just as radically, right? New ways of living had to emerge.
Exactly. The act of transforming the planet couldn't help but transform the people.
Yeah.
You get this incredible mosaic of cultures. Take Zygoot, for example. Hiroko's communal dome. It sounds quite idyllic in some ways. Bamboo tree houses, public baths. And the children, like Nirgal and Jackie, some were called ectogenes.
Ectogenes, meaning engineered.
Yeah, born through genetic manipulation, sometimes without the father's permission even. And some had these unique traits like low body temperature or being strongly left-handed. Little tweaks.
Fascinating. And beyond the domes, you mentioned a demi-monde.
All right, this whole hidden society, decentralized, sophisticated, living underground in sanctuaries and these things called moholes.
Moleholes, like deep shafts.
Essentially, yeah. Vast vertical tunnels going deep into the crust, providing shelter, resources. And these groups were incredibly diverse. You had the Bogdanovists in Vishniak, very industrial, big parties, apparently. Then you had Sufis in another mohole, Lyell, focused on preserving ancient earth cultures. A real spectrum of human experimentation in how to live.
And Sabishi. That sounds different again.
Sabishi was basically an open university, no records kept. It became the sort of unofficial capital of this demi-monde.
A place for young Martians to connect.
Exactly, where they were forging this new Martian thing, this unique culture, away from Earth's influence. Meanwhile, up on the surface, you still had big construction projects, Odessa, Hellas Basin, new immigrants arriving from Earth, even using old lava tubes as pipelines sometimes.
And what about the original settlers, the first 100? They underwent some pretty profound changes too, didn't they?
Oh, hugely. They got extreme longevity from these gerontological treatments, lived for centuries.
Well, there was a catch, right? Something about memory.
A really weird catch. They experienced significant memory loss, but specifically like from ages 25 to 90. Decades just gone or very hazy.
Wow. You gain centuries but lose a huge chunk of your active life. That's a strange trade-off. How did they cope with that? Did it change who they were?
It definitely shaped them. The sources mention them feeling like they occupied separate universes sometimes, these personal realities, or idiocosmos as they called them. Their bodies adapted too, of course. Martian gravity, the lower G, meant the native-born Martians, the Nisai, grew taller, had better coordination than Earthborns. They were physically distinct.
So this unique experience, the longevity, the memory loss, the physical changes,
Yeah.
it really makes you question human nature itself, which they apparently debated quite a bit.
They did. Could human nature even be studied scientifically? Was it just a black box? There was this interesting idea, monocausotaxophilia.
Monocausotaxophilia. That's a mouthful.
It is. It basically means the love of single, simple causes for everything. Puppel called it a kind of pathology, where seeking knowledge becomes almost a defense mechanism against fear.
Huh. And that tied into the whole fact value problem.
Exactly. Sax Russell, the scientist, was adamant. Science deals with facts, values are separate. But others argued that human values are inherent in physics, that they actually drive history, a fundamental disagreement about the role of science and humanity.
And they also talked about different kinds of intelligence, didn't they? Not just how smart you are, but how you're smart.
Right. Contrasting someone like Sachs, who's highly analytical, with people like John Boone or Maya, who had more interactional intelligence, people skills, political smarts.
And Sachs himself had that experience with aphasia after his injury. That sounds really intriguing.
It is. He lost language, struggled to speak, but found he could think purely in shapes, in numbers. It suggests, that our whole reality might be structured by our brain's wiring. And fascinatingly, he didn't just see it as a loss. He found a kind of relief in it, saw it as a chance to learn a whole different way of perceiving.
Wow. Okay, shifting gears slightly.
Yeah.
What about the little red people? That sounds almost mythical.
It does, right. But the sources describe them as actual indigenous Martians, invisible to most people, apparently. John Boone saw them first.
And they communicated with him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Had their own language. They called Mars Ka, a sound, interestingly, that pops up in lots of old Earth names for Mars, too. They're described as sort of watching humanity, trying to figure out who to talk to, wondering if humans know about Ka. It hints at this whole other layer to Mars, something ancient and hidden that humans are just stumbling upon.
Okay, so you have all this incredible change, planetary, biological, social. But underpinning it all, there's this constant struggle for power, isn't there? A battle for control of this new world.
Absolutely. It wasn't just science and settlement. It was deeply political from the start. And you have to understand the context back on Earth.
Things were bad on Earth.
Really bad. Massive overshoot. 12 billion people, far more than the planet could sustainably support. Resources were depleted: oil, forests, soil, water, fish. And then came the Great Flood. A volcanic eruption triggered a rapid melt of the West Antarctic ice sheet.
Oh, wow. How bad was that?
Catastrophic. Predicted to raise global sea levels by 6 meters incredibly quickly, threatening coastlines everywhere, displacing maybe a quarter of Earth's entire population.
That sounds like absolute chaos.
It was. Riots, arson, sabotage, particularly by the mortals, the ones who didn't have the longevity treatments. You had the treated rich hiding in walled fortress suburbs. Even biological weapons being used in conflicts, a real mess.
And into this messed up the transnationals, the big corporations.
Yes. Exactly. Companies like Praxis, Armscore, Subarashi, they'd become immensely powerful, basically controlling governments, kind of a corporate feudalism on a global scale. And they saw Mars as the next big opportunity, pouring money in, building Martian suburbs, tents even, all jostling for influence, especially around that new space elevator. Big money, big stakes.
So how is Mars actually governed amidst all this?
Well, initially there was the Transitional Authority, the UNTA, but it was mostly staffed by executives from these transnationals, and their security forces enforced the rules. The old UN agency, UNOMA, was basically powerless.
So corporate control, essentially.
Pretty much, but it wasn't uncontested. Resistance movements sprang up pretty quickly, most notably the Reds.
The Reds, also called Marsfirsters or Bogdanovists.
Yeah, those were some of the factions. Radical groups who believed Mars should be independent, free from Earth's control and its problems. They actively tried to disrupt the terraforming.
Through sabotage?
Sometimes, yeah, blowing up pumping stations out on Vestitas, things like that, or just direct confrontation.
And there are other groups too, the Boonians.
Right, followers of John Boone's ideas. Often more moderate, pushing for a free Martian government, trying to mediate between the different factions sometimes. All these hidden groups, the Demimonde, they tried to unite through something called the Congress of the Underground.
What were they debating there?
Everything. Trying to build a society from the ground up, fundamental questions about rights. They even argued about enforced freedom, whatever that means, property law, new economic systems, like a gift economy or one based on hydrogen peroxide or nitrogen or eco-economics. Just brainstorming a whole new world order.
It sounds like a society hitting a critical point.
That's how Art Randolph described it. He was an Earth guy sent over by Praxis, actually. He called the revolution an evolutionary thing, or like a phase change in physics. A natural, maybe unavoidable next step for Mars.
And the core conflict remained that philosophical split, right? Terraforming versus preserving Mars.
Absolutely. Sachs-Russell pushing for full transformation to make Mars habitable for humans, versus Anne Claiborne arguing for ecopoiesis, a gentler approach. Preserving Mars's rights of place, keeping the highlands wild.
That divide seems central to everything. The desire for Martian independence versus Earth's influence.
Especially among the younger native-born Martians. They really wanted to cut ties with Earth's chaos and the transnationals' grip.
And how to achieve that independence. That was another point of contention.
Big time. You had Art Randolph suggesting civil protests, nonviolent approaches, but others pushed for more radical action, seizing power plants, direct sabotage. Hiroko talked about a silk revolution, bloodless if possible, but the pressure for violent uprising was definitely there.
Even science got dragged into the politics.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point from the sources. Scientific conferences, which Sachs thought were, utopian spaces for pure knowledge, they became battlegrounds for policy debates, for grant money. The line between science and politics got really blurry, shows how power dynamics seep into everything.
So behind all these huge planetary changes and political fights, we have these really compelling human stories playing out. Let's maybe touch on a few key characters. Nirgal, for instance.
Yeah, Nirgal's journey is really interesting. He starts as this quite sheltered kid in Zygote, known for having a warming touch, apparently, and being able to run for ages. Very curious. But he grows up fast, becomes this young, politically aware, ecological engineer, deeply connected to Jackie, who he grew up with, and to Hiroko, his mother figure. He kind of becomes a young male Hiroko, engaged with everyone, interested in everything.
His journey really seems to mirror Mars's own coming of age, doesn't it? From innocence to active engagement.
I think so. He represents that native Martian generation feeling a responsibility for the planet. Then you have Sax Russell, of course, the brilliant scientist, but maybe not the best with people.
Central to the terraforming, though.
Absolutely central. And his journey after the brain injury we mentioned, regaining speech, but learning to think differently in shapes and numbers. It wasn't just a setback, it was a transformation for him, a chance to learn again.
And his relationships were complex, too, with Anne Claiborne.
A lifelong intellectual sparring partner, really. Deep disagreements, but also mutual respect. And then, surprisingly, a brief romantic thing with Phyllis later on, after he'd undergone some physical changes himself. For him, though, science was everything. A conference was his idea of utopia.
Then there's Maya Twitovna, a very different personality.
Oh, very. Powerful, strong-willed, called the Black Widow sometimes. Prone to these intense mood swings, really haunted by the past, especially John Boone's death.
She struggled with that weight.
Deeply. But she channeled it into leading the resistance, using her sharp mind and considerable influence. Her relationship with Michelle, though, seems to be a real anchor for her, helping her navigate those emotional storms. Shows that even the strongest need connection.
What about Art Randolph, the outsider perspective?
Yeah, Art's fascinating. Sent from Earth by William Ford at Praxis on this covert mission. He lands on Mars and is initially just overwhelmed, shocked, queasy by the sheer scale of it. But he adapts. Learns to handle the low gravity, navigates the complex politics, starts to understand both sides' Earth's corporate interests and the Martians' desire for independence. He becomes this subtle diplomat and grows to really appreciate Mars. His journey shows how adaptable humans can be physically and culturally.
And Anne Claiborne, the fierce opponent of terraforming.
Anne is kind of the conscience of the story in a way, often grim, yeah, but fiercely dedicated to preserving Mars's natural state. She's dealing with her own grief, too, losing Simon earlier. She constantly pushes back against what she sees as human arrogance, that drive to just remake everything in our own image. A powerful, necessary counterpoint.
Lastly, Coyote. He sounds like a really enigmatic figure.
He really is. A stowaway originally, apparently. Becomes a mentor to Nirgal. Has this cracked face from old injuries. Very pragmatic, a leader among the Reds. Known for these sudden, slightly alarming, cackling laughs. He orchestrates risky operations, understands that sometimes open conflict with the transnationals is necessary, almost a shamanic figure for the resistance, guiding the younger generation towards radical action.
So we've covered a huge amount of ground today. From the nuts and bolts of terraforming a planet, literally building an atmosphere and oceans, to the deeply personal stories of the people living through that transformation. This deep dive into Green Mars really drives home how learning about these imagined futures is such a rich, ongoing process.
Absolutely. We've seen a planet physically reborn, and in turn, how that rebirth ripples through every single aspect of human life. Biology, psychology, politics are very understanding of what it means to be human or Martian. Things like adjusting to Martian G, the ethical maze of creating new life, the sheer mind-boggling scale of it all. It just reminds you that progress or change is never straightforward. It always comes with baggage, with consequences you didn't expect.
Yeah, and thinking about everything we've touched on, that constant tension, right, between the scientific drive to reshape and the ecological impulse to preserve, the clash of different dreams for the future, and just the basic human need for purpose, for connection, especially when the world is changing under your feet. It's a lot to chew on.
It really is. And it leaves you with a pretty profound question, I think. In a world changing that dramatically, where words like natural and human start to lose their fixed meaning, how do we decide what values matter most? How do you, as an individual, as part of society, navigate that pull between wanting control and needing to adapt? And maybe the biggest question of all, what kind of world do you ultimately want to help build? Or perhaps what kind of world do you simply want to live in?